The doors of the Galactic Council chamber slammed open in the middle of a vote, and that was the first sign that something had gone terribly wrong. In my 400 years of life, I had witnessed countless debates, conflicts, and political crises. I had seen empires rise from nothing. I had watched powerful civilizations collapse into forgotten history. But never had anyone dared to interrupt a formal vote of the Galactic Council. My name is Velmore. I am the senior strategist of the Council. For centuries, I believed there was nothing left in the universe capable of surprising me. I was wrong. A delegation from the vast Dominion entered the chamber. 12 figures, tall, proud, covered in ceremonial armor polished so brightly that it reflected the chamber lights like mirrors. Every step they took carried the confidence of a civilization that had never been forced to fear anyone. Their leader, a war noble named Dakar, walked directly down the central aisle. He ignored the guards, ignored the officials, ignored every tradition we had maintained for 10,000 years. The entire chamber fell silent. Representatives from hundreds of species watched in disbelief. Dakar reached the center of the chamber and stopped before the council platform. He did not request permission to speak. He did not offer respect. He simply raised his hand. A massive holographic star map appeared above us. Thousands of systems lit up across the projection. Then Dakar spoke. His voice carried through every corner of the chamber. The vast Dominion has begun a military campaign. A wave of whispers spread among the delegates. He continued, "We have launched our invasion fleet toward a primitive system located on the far edge of explored space." The map shifted. A small world appeared. A blue planet, a young civilization, a species most of the galaxy considered insignificant. Humanity. Dakar's expression showed complete confidence. They possess limited technology. They have no ancient empire, no great alliance, no history of galactic conquest. He looked around the chamber. They are weak. Some delegates nodded. Others remained silent. But I noticed something strange. The oldest species in the chamber were not smiling. They remembered history, and they understood something the vast Dominion had forgotten. Young civilizations were unpredictable, especially one that had survived the harshest planet in the galaxy. Dakar continued, "Within days, the human world will surrender. After that, the Dominion will claim their resources and remove them as a future threat." The chamber remained silent. Then I looked at the star map again, at that tiny blue world, and for the first time in centuries, I wondered if the Dominion had made a mistake. Because humanity was not an ancient empire. They were not the strongest. They were not the most advanced. But every record we had ever studied about them contained the same pattern. When cornered, they changed. They adapted. They survived. And now, for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy was about to discover what happened when someone tried to conquer them. 900 warships, 2 million soldiers, the largest fleet the Dominion had gathered in living memory. Their target was a small yellow star with one inhabited world, a planet rich in rare metals and water, defended by a species so backward that it was not even a member of the council. The younger delegates began to murmur. Some of them laughed. An invasion of a non-member world was rude, perhaps, and it would cost the Vast some trade agreements, but it was not against our laws. Worlds outside the council were outside our protection. The Vast had done this kind of thing before, and so had others. It was ugly business, but it was old business. Then the star map turned, and the coordinates appeared in glowing numbers beside the little yellow sun, and my heart stopped beating for a moment. Both of them, I knew those coordinates. I had written them down myself 300 years ago in a file that was sealed so deep in the council archives that only 9 living beings had the clearance to open it. The yellow star was called Sol. The little blue planet was called Earth. I stood up so fast that my chair fell over behind me. The sound echoed through the chamber, and a few delegates turned to look at me, surprised, because I am known as the calmest being in this entire building. I have sat through declarations of war without blinking. I have listened to the collapse of whole economies while sipping my tea. And there I was, standing with my hands shaking, staring at a map like a frightened child. Around me, the chamber was still laughing. The young races thought this was entertainment. The male delegation was already placing friendly bets on how many days the invasion would take. 3 days, said one. 2, said another. The planet has no fleet worth naming, said a third. It will be over before the news even reaches us. But not everyone was laughing. I looked across the chamber and saw the ancient ones, the species who had been part of the council as long as mine had. The Yun delegate, a being older than me by a century, had gone completely still, her long fingers gripping the edge of her desk. The orphan ambassador was whispering urgently to his aides, and one by one, his aides were going pale, and then quietly, without a word of explanation, the entire delegation stood up and walked out of the chamber. Then the Yun left. Then the Kaldari, the oldest races in the galaxy, the ones who remembered, were leaving the room the way people leave a building when they smell smoke. Docker noticed. He laughed and called after them, asking if the old ones were too weak in the stomach to hear about a glorious conquest. He turned to the rest of the chamber and promised that within one cycle, the Dominion would present the Council with a gift of rare metals from the conquered world as a gesture of friendship. I found my voice. It came out rougher than I intended, and the chamber's sound system carried it to every corner of the room. I asked him one question. I asked him if he had read the quarantine file on that system before he launched his fleet. The chamber went quiet. Darer turned to look at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes because everyone in that room knew who I was. I do not speak often. When I do, governments listen. He recovered quickly. He waved one armored hand as if brushing away an insect and said that yes, his intelligence officers had found an old quarantine marker on the system, some dusty warning written centuries ago, but the file attached to it was clearly corrupted nonsense. It claimed absurd things, impossible things. His analyst had concluded it was propaganda planted long ago by some rival power to keep others away from a valuable system. No species as primitive as the one described could possibly be dangerous. The file even admitted the Nivist had no faster-than-light travel when it was written. 300 years, he said, is nothing. A species does not become a threat in 300 years. I stared at him for a long moment. I thought about explaining. I thought about standing there and telling 900 delegates what I had seen with my own eyes 3 centuries ago, what I had written in that file with my own hands, why the warning signs around that little yellow star faced outward. But I looked at his face, at the pride shining in his eyes, at the 900 ships already crossing the dark towards Sol, and I understood that no words of mine could turn that fleet around. The Vass had spent the wealth of an entire generation on this invasion. Docker's family name was attached to it. He would sooner fly into a sun than admit a mistake in front of the council. So I did not argue. I picked up my fallen chair, sat back down, and turned to my aide, a young orphan named Orvi, who had served me for 20 years and had never once seen me afraid. I told her to begin recording everything, every word, every image, every transmission that would come from the Sol system in the days ahead. She asked me why, her voice barely above a whisper for the historical archive. I told her, someone must document the end of the vast Dominion. She thought I was joking. I could see it in her face. The Dominion was one of the great powers of the galaxy, a military machine with thousands of years of conquest behind it. 900 warships could break most member states of the Council in a single campaign. The idea that one primitive planet could threaten them was on its surface madness. Dakar finished his speech to scattered applause. The session moved on to other matters, trade routes and border disputes, the ordinary machinery of the galaxy turning as it always had. But I heard none of it. I sat in my chair and stared at the projection of that small blue world still floating above the chamber floor. And I felt 300 years of carefully buried memories rising up inside me like floodwater. I remembered a younger version of myself standing on an observation deck above that sane blue planet, watching its surface through long-range lenses. I remembered the report I filed. I remembered the exact moment the Council's old guard read my findings and decided unanimously and in total secrecy that the Sol system would be sealed away behind a quarantine wall, that no ship would approach it, that no signal would be sent to it, and that the file explaining why would be locked so deep that future generations might mistake it for legend. We were not protecting the natives from the galaxy. The natives did not need protecting. We were buying ourselves time, and we were praying, each in the manner of our own species, that the beings on that world would stay busy with their own affairs and never look up. For 300 years, the prayer had been answered. The quarantine held. The galaxy forgot. The file gathered dust. And beings like Docker grew up never knowing why one unremarkable yellow star on the edge of the map carried a warning older than their grandparents. And now 900 warships were flying straight at it. Commanded by a noble who had read the warning and laughed. That evening, after the session ended, I walked the long corridor to the archive vault alone. I pressed my hand to the reader, spoke the old codes, and watched the seals open for the first time in decades. The file was exactly where I had left it. My own handwriting on the cover, younger and steadier than my hand is now. I did not need to read it. I knew every word. But I carried it back to my office anyway, set it on my desk, and poured myself a drink that I did not touch, or found me there hours later, still staring at the file. She had been running calculations. She said the vast fleet would reach the edge of the Sol system in 11 days. She had also pulled every record the Council had on the system, and she was confused because apart from the sealed file, there was almost nothing. No survey updates, no observation logs. 300 years of complete silence. She asked me the question I had been dreading. She asked me what was actually in the file, what I had seen all those years ago that frightened the oldest races in the galaxy into building a fence around a single ordinary star. I looked at my young aide, and I realized that in 11 days, the whole galaxy was going to learn the answer whether I spoke or not. So I opened the file and I began to tell her about the human race. By the next morning, I was not telling the story to Orvie alone. Word had spread through the Council the way fear always spreads, quietly and then all at once. The Ofen had requested an emergency closed session. The Yun had supported it. By midday, I was standing in a sealed briefing room in front of the leaders of 40 governments, holding a 300-year-old file in my hands, and every eye in the room was on me. The Vass were not invited. Their fleet was 10 days from Sol, far beyond recall range now, committed to their course. This meeting was not about saving them. This meeting was about what would happen to the rest of us afterward. I set the file on the podium and told them I would not read it to them. I would simply tell them what happened because I was there, and some things should be heard from a witness rather than a page. 300 years ago, I began the Council did what has always done. Our long-range surveys detected radio signals from an unexplored system, the chatter of a young species taking its first steps into technology. Standard procedure. We had welcomed dozens of species this way. A first contact team is assembled. The new species is studied from a distance for a few years, and when they seem ready, we introduce ourselves, offer them membership, and add another seat to the chamber. It is the proudest tradition we have. I was a junior observer on that mission, the youngest officer on the ship. We arrived at the edge of the Sol system, full of routine confidence, parked ourselves behind their outermost planet, deployed our instruments, and began to watch. The first reports were ordinary. One inhabited world, a single species of intelligent life, calling themselves humans, divided into nearly 200 separate nations. They had radio-early computers, primitive aircraft, pre-space flight, or so we thought. The survey commander estimated we would observe for 5 years and then make contact. He predicted it would be one of the easiest first contacts in Council history. Then we started actually paying attention, and one by one, the scientists on our ship stopped sleeping properly. The first thing that troubled us was the planet itself. Understand, I told the room that most intelligent life in the galaxy arises on gentle worlds, mild gravity, calm weather, few predators. Evolution prefers comfortable cradles. The Council classifies planets by danger, and the highest category, the one we almost never see life emerge from at all, is called a death world. Earth is a death world. The gravity is crushing by the standards of most member species. The axial tilt creates seasons of brutal heat and killing cold across the same patch of ground. The weather systems produce spinning storms hundreds of kilometers wide, walls of ocean water that rise up and erase coastlines, and columns of wind that can lift a building off the ground. The planet's crust is unstable, splitting and grinding, opening the ground without warning, pouring out liquid rock. The oceans are full of predators. The land is full of predators. The air in some places is full of predators. Even the smallest life forms are lethal, invisible organisms that have killed more humans than every war in their history. Combined, no species should have survived there long enough to learn to make fire. Humans did not just survive. I watched the data come in week after week, and what I saw made no sense to me at the time. They lived everywhere. They lived in burning deserts and on frozen ice sheets. They lived on the slopes of active volcanoes, because the soil there was good for farming. And when I read that sentence in a report, I made the analyst rewrite it, because I assumed it was an error. It was not an error. They knew the mountain could erupt. They planted their crops anyway, and simply kept a close eye on it. They had not escaped their predators. They had studied them. The great hunting animals of their world, creatures with claws and teeth that could end a human in seconds, were kept in parks protected. Humans passed laws to make sure their own predators did not die out because they thought the animals were beautiful and their children liked to look at them. One of our biologists resigned from the mission after the phyla domestication crossed her desk. Humans had taken a pack-hunting predator of their world, a wolf, an animal built by evolution to chase and bring down prey, and over thousands of years they had reshaped it into a companion. They let these descended predators sleep in their beds. They trusted them to guard their offspring. Our biologist could not process it. Her species had needed 600 years of civilization just to feel safe from their natural enemies. Humans had looked at theirs and decided to make friends. But it was the third year of observation that changed everything, and this is the part of the file that DARE's analysts dismissed as impossible. We were watching their global communications, learning their languages, mapping their cultures, and slowly the historical picture came into focus. We had arrived by pure chance. Only a few decades after the largest war in their history, not a war between humanity and some outside threat, a war between humans and other humans. It had stretched across the entire planet. It had pulled in nearly every nation they had. The numbers of their dead were larger than the total populations of some council member species. And the weapons, I stood before 40 governments and told them plainly what we found, because there is no gentle way to say it. In the course of fighting among themselves, humans had discovered how to split the atom, they had turned that discovery into a weapon, and they had used it. And then, in the strange grief and terror that followed, they had built tens of thousands more of those weapons and pointed them at each other across their oceans. Our military attach reviewed the figures 4 times. At the peak, the humans possessed enough of these devices to sterilize their own planet many times over. They were a single species on a single world, with no knowledge that anyone else existed, and they had armed themselves on a scale that our largest fleets reserved for full-scale interstellar war. And here is the part I need you to understand, I told the room, because this is the part that kept me awake then and keeps me awake now. They never used them again. They came to the very edge of ending themselves, looked over that edge several times, and every single time they stepped back, flawed, divided, frightened, furious with one another. And yet, when it mattered most, they chose restraint. We watched recordings of individual human officers who, in moments of confusion, with procedures telling them to act, personally refused to launch. Single individuals who held the fate of their species in their hands and simply said no, a species violent enough to build such weapons and disciplined enough never to use them again. Our cultural analysts did not have a category for that. We still do not. Then came the rockets. We assumed naturally that a species with such weapons would crawl carefully into space, if it went at all. Instead, we watched 2 of their rival nations turn their missile programs into a race. Not a race to attack each other. A race to the sky for pride, for curiosity, for the simple glory of being first. They took the same machines designed to carry their most terrible weapons, removed the weapons, and put people on top instead. I want to be precise about what that means. Their early rockets failed constantly. They exploded on launch pads. They tumbled out of the sky. The humans gathered data from each failure, adjusted, and built another. And then they found volunteers, more volunteers than they had seats, to sit inside a small metal container on top of a tower of explosive fuel and be hurled into the dark. The first humans to leave their world did so in machines with failure rates that no council species would accept for cargo, let alone crew. Within a single human lifetime, they went from their first powered flight in the air to walking on their moon. One lifetime, there were humans alive who saw both events. Our survey commander checked that fact personally, because he refused to believe the timeline. The average council species takes between 400 and 1,000 years to cross that same distance of progress. Humans did it in 66, and when they reached their moon, that gray and airless rock, do you know what they did? They collected stones, planted a flag, and one of them hit a small leather ball with a stick for amusement. Then they came home, and almost immediately began to complain that going to the Colite moon had become boring. Boring, they used that word. Our linguists confirmed the translation. The most dangerous journey their species had ever attempted had to become, within 3 years, too routine to hold their attention. It was around this time that our survey commander called the senior staff together and asked the question that would define the rest of the mission. He asked us to stop evaluating the humans as a precon species and start evaluating them as a strategic one. Not because they were hostile. We had no evidence they were hostile, but because of the curve. Every species has a curve, a rate of progress over time. Most curves are gentle slopes. You can predict within a century or two where a species will be. The human curve was not a slope. It was a wall. Each generation of their technology made the previous one obsolete within years. Their computers doubled in power on a schedule so reliable that the humans themselves had turned it into a law and then treated that law as a challenge to beat. Knowledge that one human nation discovered spread to all the others, through trade, through theft, through sheer talkiveness, and every borrowed idea bred 10 new ones. Our mission mathematician, a cautious being who had charted the development of 11 species, ran the human curve forward and then refused to present her own results. The commander ordered her to. She stood in front of us and said that if the curve held, the humans would have practical fusion within a century, self-improving machine intelligence shortly after, and the beginnings of interstellar capability within 200 years, and that her model broke down past that point because the curve went vertical and her mathematics could not describe what a vertical curve meant for a civilization. There was one more report, the last one filed before we withdrew. It came from our behavioral team, and it was in some ways the most unsettling of all, because it had nothing to do with weapons or rockets. The behavioral team had spent 5 years studying how humans treat one another and how they imagine the unknown. They found a species that argued constantly, that competed over everything, that could be petty and cruel and selfish in ways that embarrassed even our most cynical analysts. And the very same species, often the very same individuals, would dive into floodwaters to save strangers. They would hear about a disaster on the far side of their planet affecting people they would never meet, who spoke languages they could not understand, and they would send food, money, medicine, and volunteers in such quantities that the receiving regions sometimes could not process at all. They donated parts of their own bodies to strangers. They ran into burning buildings for people they had never met with such regularity that they had built entire honored professions around doing exactly that. And when they imagined us, when they told each other stories about life beyond their sky, the stories were split almost evenly between two visions. In half the stories, the aliens came to destroy them, and humanity fought back in one. In the other half, the aliens came in peace, and humanity reached out and made friends. In almost none of the stories did humanity lose, and in almost none of them did humanity run. The behavioral team flagged this pattern with a single line of analysis that I have never forgotten. This species, they wrote, cannot imagine a future in which it does not matter. In the 5th year, the commander made his recommendation, and the senior staff voted to support it. We did not initiate contact. We packed our instruments, erased our traces, and went home. And I wrote the file, the one sitting on this podium, and the inner circle of the council read it, and made the quarantine absolute. I remember the closing session of that review. I remember the Yoon elder who chaired it, a being who had personally welcomed 9 species into the council. She read my file twice in silence while we waited. Then she sat it down and said that in all her years, she had approved contact with species more advanced than the humans and felt no fear, and refused contact with species more savage than the humans and felt no regret. But she had never before seen a species that was both a danger and a wonder at the same time, and she did not believe the galaxy was ready for them, and she was not entirely sure it ever would be. She ordered the quarantine, sealed the file, and made the 9 of us swear to silence. Her exact words to me as the session ended were these: "We are not locking them in, Velcor. We are locking ourselves out until the day they open the door themselves. Pray that when they do, they knock gently." I finished speaking and looked out at the briefing room. 40 governments stared back at me, and no one said a word for a long moment. Then the male delegate, the same one who had been placing bets in the chamber the day before, raised one trembling hand and asked the question they were all thinking. 300 years had passed since my mission. 300 years with no observation, no contact, no data of any kind. If the humans had achieved so much in the 66 years between their first aircraft and their moon landing, then what exactly had they been doing for the last 3 centuries? I told him the truth. I told him that I did not know, that no one in this galaxy knew, and that the mathematician's curve, the one that went vertical, had been given 300 years to climb. The vast fleet was 9 days from Seoul. The room dissolved into noise, every government talking over every other, and in the middle of it all, I quietly asked Orvi to check something for me. The original radio signals, the ones that first revealed humanity 3 centuries ago, had been growing fainter in our records for decades, and everyone had assumed the humans were simply moving to tighter, more efficient forms of communication, as all species do. Or came back an hour later with the answer, and her hands were unsteady as she gave it to me. The human radio signals had not faded because the humans went quiet. They had faded because roughly 200 years ago, the noise of their civilization had become organized, compressed, encrypted. The chaotic chatter of a young species had become the disciplined hum of something vast, and our old instruments, pointed that way out of habit, had been recording the edges of it for decades without anyone understanding what they were hearing. Whatever was waiting for the Vares at Seoul, it had not spent 300 years sleeping. It had spent 300 years building. 9 days later, I was standing in the council war room when the first transmission from the Sol system arrived, and within 1 hour, the galaxy changed forever. The war room had never been so crowded. Delegates who normally sent junior staff to military briefings had come in person. The Vas ambassador, a smooth politician named Selich, who had stayed behind while Dare rode with the fleet, stood near the main display with his arms folded, wearing the expression of a being about to enjoy a long-awaited victory. The Dominion had arranged for the invasion to be broadcast live to the Council. They wanted witnesses for their triumph. They were going to get witnesses, just not for the reason they imagined. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, beyond the orbit of the outermost planet, in perfect formation. 900 warships, arranged in the classic Vas spearhead, with Dakar's flagship at the tip. The fleet sensors reached out across the system, and the data began to flow back to us. And that is when the war room went silent for the first time. The Sol system was supposed to be dark. One inhabited planet, a scattering of dead worlds and silence. The Sol system was glowing. The sensor feed painted it for us point by point. And every point was a structure. There were rings of artificial stations around the 4th planet, the red one, and the haze of an atmosphere being engineered on its surface. There were lights moving through the asteroid belt, thousands of them, mining platforms, and factory complexes drifting between the rocks. The moons of the giant planets had installations on them. There were structures in places that made no industrial sense to us at all until our analyst realized they were habitats built not for resources, but simply because humans had decided to live there. And around the star itself, close in where no council species builds anything, there was a swarm, millions of thin gleaming panels arranged in slowly turning rings, drinking the output of the star directly. Not a complete shell, not yet, but the unmistakable first stage of one. The humans were harvesting their sun. Our chief analyst stated in a flat voice that the energy collection we were observing exceeded the combined power generation of the 12 largest council member states. A delegate behind me asked him to repeat that. He did. Nobody spoke after that on the display. The vast fleet hung motionless at the edge of the system. I can only imagine the arguments taking place on Dar's bridge in those minutes. Their intelligence had promised them a sleeping farm world. Their sensors were showing them a furnace of industry, filling an entire star system. Any commander with sense would have turned around right then, but Docker's family name was on this invasion, and 900 ships were watching him, and the entire council was watching them. Retreat without a single shot fired would end his house forever. I watched the fleet hold position for 17 minutes, and I knew exactly what was being decided in that silence, and I knew exactly how it would end, because pride has destroyed more fleets than any weapon ever built. The fleet moved forward. They advanced toward the nearest human structure, a mining and refining station anchored to a large asteroid at the edge of the belt. As they approached, the station spoke to them. It broadcast in clean, fluent VAS, which should have been the second warning, because the humans were not supposed to know the VAS existed, let alone speak their language. The message was calm and almost friendly. It identified the station, stated that the approaching fleet had entered monitored space, and requested that they state their intentions. It even offered docking assistance if they required repair or resupply. Selich, the VAS ambassador, laughed out loud in the war room and said that the cattle were offering to feed their butchers. I will tell you what Dur did, because the record must be complete and honest. He did not negotiate. He did not demand surrender first. He ordered a single squadron to open fire on the station as a demonstration to show the humans what they were facing, to break their spirit at the first contact, which is the vast doctrine in every campaign they have ever fought. 40 ships fired on the mining station. The station's outer structures took the hits and broke apart. And then, before the light of the impacts had even faded, we learned the third thing about humans, that no briefing had prepared us for. The station had been evacuated before the first shot. The humans had watched the fleet approach for 9 days. The friendly greeting, the offer of docking assistance, all of it had been transmitted from a station that was already empty. Holding the door open with one hand, while the other hand quietly moved every person out of reach. They had given the VAS one chance to be peaceful, in full knowledge that the chance would probably be refused, and they had prepared completely for the refusal. The response did not come from the station. The response came from everywhere. The asteroid belt lit up, not with explosions, but with engine flares, thousands of them, as machines that had been drifting in the rocks like sleeping fish came awake all at once. Drone weapons platforms, automated interceptors. They did not rush at the fleet in a wild swarm. They moved in patterns coordinated across millions of kilometers with a precision that our own war computers struggled to follow, closing off the fleet's escape angles one by one, the way a closing hand surrounds an insect. And from deeper in the system, from the orbit of the red planet, the human fleet came out. Until that moment, no one in the galaxy knew that humanity had a fleet. We watched the formation rise out of the shipyards, and our military observers began calling out numbers, and then stopped calling out numbers because the count kept climbing, and the climbing was making the room feel cold. The human ships were unlike Council designs. Council warships are built like palaces, beautiful and broad, because among our species, war has always been partly ceremony. The human ships had no ceremony in them anywhere. They were long, dense, scarred-looking constructions built around their engines and their weapons. And every line of them said the same quiet thing. We were built by people who expect to be hit and intend to keep going afterward. The first human weapons reached the VAS fleet before the human ships were even visible to VAS sensors. They were not energy beams. They were simple masses of metal accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light, fired from launchers hidden across the system. There is no shield in the Council arsenal that matters against a projectile carrying that much speed. The Vast discovered this when the leading edge of their spearhead formation simply ceased to exist. 11 ships gone between one frame of the broadcast and the next, with nothing visible to shoot back at. Dar ordered the fleet into defensive formation, and the fleet performed the maneuver beautifully. And it did not matter because the humans had been watching vast formations for 9 days through instruments. The vast never detected, and they had already modeled every formation in the Dominion playbook. Each time the fleet reorganized, the incoming fire pattern adjusted before the reorganization was complete. The humans were not reacting to the battle. They had finished the battle in advance, in simulation 10,000 times, and were now simply performing the version that matched reality. The drone swarms reached the fleet next. Vast point defense is respected across the galaxy, and it worked. At first, the gunners cut down the first wave in great numbers. Then the second wave came in flying differently, adjusted by machine minds that had studied the depths of the first wave in real time, approaching along the exact angles where the defensive fire had been thinnest. The third wave did not behave like the second. Every wave was a new exam, and the VAS were being graded by something that never repeated a question. In the war room, Selick had stopped smiling. He was speaking rapidly into his private channel, and whatever answers he was receiving from the Dominion were making his hands shake. Then the human capital ships arrived, and we saw the thing that I will never be able to remove from my memory. A human heavy cruiser exchanged fire with 3 brass ships of the line. It struck all 3. It was struck in return solidly by weapons that would have finished any council vessel of its size. The hit tore open its midsection, and we watched its atmosphere vent into space in a long white plume. And Selick shouted in triumph because a ship venting atmosphere is a dead ship. The human cruiser did not stop. It did not even slow down. It kept firing through its own escaping air. Every weapon still in action, and it held its course, and our analysts pulled in close on the sensor feed and found the explanation. The crew compartments were sealed, and the crew was unharmed because every human aboard was already wearing a pressure suit, and had been since before the battle started, because human naval doctrine assumes from the first moment that the ship will be hit. Council crews fight in comfortable uniforms inside hulls they trust. Humans fight dressed for the vacuum inside ships designed to be wounded, because they never extend trust to luck. The ship was not dying. The ship was built to bleed and keep walking because the people who built it came from a world where everything bleeds, and the things that stop walking do not get to go home. 1 hour from the first shot fired at the empty mining station to the moment the vast formation broke. 1 single hour passed. A third of the Dominion fleet, 300 warships, the pride of a 1,000-year military tradition, was gone. The human losses, as far as our instruments could determine, were 2 drones destroyed beyond recovery and 1 cruiser requiring repair. The remaining vast ships pulled back beyond the orbit of the outermost planet, and the humans, in a decision that confused every military mind in the war room, let them go. The drone swarms broke off pursuit. The relativistic launchers fell silent. The human fleet held its position and simply waited, as if the entire engagement had been a door, closing politely in a visitor's face. While the fleets held their positions, our intelligence services managed to capture something that taught us more about humanity than the entire battle had. It was a fragment of internal human communications. Voice traffic between the crews of 2 of their warships recorded during the engagement itself and decoded hours later. The councils expected to hear the cold voices of machines or the fury of warriors. What we heard instead silenced the intelligence briefing room for a full minute. We heard humans being calm. Worse than calm, we heard them being funny. In the middle of an engagement against 900 warships, a human weapons officer reported a successful firing solution and then complained in the same breath that he had lost a wager about which vast formation would appear first, and that he now owed his crewmate dinner. The crewmate replied that she intended to choose the most expensive restaurant on the station. Their captain told them both to focus, and the captain was laughing while she said it. A few minutes later, when their cruiser took the hit that tore open its midsection, the same voices ran through damage procedures in quick, flat, perfect sequence, sealed their compartments, confirmed every crew member alive, and then with the ship still venting and the battle still burning around them. The weapons officer asked whether this counted as a dramatic enough day to upgrade the dinner to dessert as well. Our behavioral analysts attached a note to the recording before it was filed. A species that jokes in the middle of its own emergencies, the note said, is not a species that panics, and a species that does not panic cannot be stampeded, and a species that cannot be stampeded cannot be beaten by fear, and fear is 60% of all warfare. Adjust every model accordingly. Beyond the war room, the rest of the galaxy was learning the news in waves, and the waves were doing damage. The great markets of the core worlds had convulsed when the first engagement footage spread. Insurance syndicates suspended coverage on every trade route within 50 light-years of Sol, then quietly reinstated it hours later when their own analysts pointed out that the humans had not damaged a single neutral vessel and had in fact transmitted navigation warnings to 2 civilian freighters that wandered near the battle space, advising them politely of debris hazards along their course. Half the galaxy was watching a war. The humans somehow were simultaneously fighting that war and providing traffic safety updates to bystanders, and I genuinely could not tell which of those two facts frightened our governments more. It was Orvie, my aide, who understood first, she said quietly, that the humans were not trying to destroy the fleet. They were teaching it. Every part of the engagement had been a lesson with a single sentence behind it, and the sentence was, "You cannot do this, please stop." Dakar did not stop. The record must show this also. With a third of his fleet gone and his name on fire, he sent the humans a formal transmission, broadcast openly so the council would hear it, demanding their immediate and unconditional surrender, promising that the Dominion's full strength had not yet been shown, and granting them 1 planetary rotation to comply. The human reply arrived 90 seconds later. It was also broadcast openly. It was text-only in flawless Fra script, and it was 2 words long. Our translation department worked through the night on those 2 words. The literal rendering was simple enough, a casual refusal, but the first word was an expression of amusement, an abbreviation humans use among friends, in informal when something is funny. The linguist's final report stated that the closest cultural equivalent would be a soldier responding to a formal declaration of war by laughing in a relaxed and friendly manner, and that the choice of register was certainly deliberate, and that the message a species sends by being relaxed and friendly while refusing 900 warships should be considered carefully by all member governments. The 2 words were, lol, no. In the war room, in the terrible silence after that translation was read aloud, the Yun delegate turned to me. She is the granddaughter of the elder who sealed the quarantine 3 centuries ago, and she asked me the question her grandmother would have asked. She did not ask whether the Vass would lose. Everyone in the room already knew the Vass would lose. She asked me what the humans would do after they had won. She asked me whether the file on her grandmother's desk all those years ago had said anything about how humans treat a defeated enemy. I told her the truth. I told her the file contained 5 years of observation on exactly that subject, and that the answer was the strangest thing in the entire document, and that the galaxy was about to see it demonstrated, and that nothing in 10,000 years of council history would prepare them for it, because the most dangerous thing about humanity was never their weapons. On the display, beyond the orbit of the outermost planet, Dakar's deadline was counting down, and 600 vast warships were forming up for a second assault. And somewhere behind the human lines, something enormous was beginning to move. Dakar's launched his second assault at dawn Council Standard Time, and it lasted 11 minutes. I will not describe it the way the first engagement deserved describing, because there is nothing new to learn from it, except the depth of one commander's pride. 600 ships charged the inner system in a formation the Vass call the Hammer of Houses, a maneuver so old and honored that Dominion children learn its shape before they learn to write. The humans had clearly learned its shape too. The enormous object we had seen moving behind their lines revealed itself. A mobile launch platform the size of a small moon, and it did not fire at the vast ships at all. It fired ahead of them, filling the space the formation was about to occupy with clouds of dense, slow-moving debris and the Hammer of Houses traveling at attack speed, flew into a wall of its own momentum. The formation shattered without the humans striking a single direct blow. Ships collided with debris and with each other. Drive systems failed, and the moment the formation broke apart, the human drone swarms moved in among the scattered vessels, and instead of finishing them, they began disabling them. Engines were cut with surgical strikes. Weapon arrays were burned off hulls. One by one, 600 warships were converted into 600 drifting containers, full of frightened soldiers, and not one of those containers was destroyed. Dakar's flagship was the last vessel still under power. The human fleet surrounded it at a respectful distance and did nothing. They did not board it. They did not demand anything. They simply held it there in silence while its commander sat inside with the wreckage of his family's name drifting around him in every direction. Then the humans transmitted a message to the disabled fleet. Our war room intercepted it, and I asked for it to be played aloud, and I watched the faces of 40 governments as they listened. The message was an offer of rescue. The humans informed the vast crews that their life support systems were damaged, which the humans knew because the humans had damaged them precisely in a way that left a comfortable margin of time. Rescue and medical vessels were already en route from the inner system. Any crew that wished to be evacuated would be taken aboard, treated, fed, and held in safe conditions until arrangements could be made with their government. Any crew that preferred to wait for a Dominion recovery mission was welcome to do so, and the humans would supply them with emergency power in the meantime. The message ended with a sentence that our analysts circulated through the entire council within the hour. "We are not your enemies," it said. "You attacked our home and we stopped you, and as far as we are concerned, that matter is now settled. The next chapter is yours to choose." Selleck, the Vass ambassador, left the war room without a word. I am told he spent the next several hours in communication with the Dominion homeworld, and that the Dominion's great houses were tearing one another apart over whom to blame, and that the words "emergency session" were being used for the first time in brass history in connection with the word "surrender." But it was what happened in our own chamber that I must describe carefully now, because this is the part of the story where the danger stopped being Vass and started being us. The council met in full emergency session that evening. The mood in the chamber had transformed. 11 days earlier, these delegates had laughed and placed bets. Now the galaxy's governments had watched a single uncontacted species dismantle one of our great powers in 2 engagements, while suffering almost no losses, while harvesting their own star, while speaking our languages, while knowing our fleet doctrines. And the laughter was gone, and in its place was something I had spent my whole career learning to recognize. And dread, fear dressed up as strategy. The militarist faction took the floor first. Their leader, the delegate from the Hope Combine, gave the finest speech of his life, and I want history to record that it was a fine speech, because terrible decisions are almost never proposed in terrible speeches. He praised human skill, he acknowledged human restraint, and then he laid out the arithmetic of fear. The humans, he said, were confined to a single star system, one system against the thousands of the council. Today, and only today, the numbers favored us. But we had all seen the curve, the vertical curve from the old file, and we had all seen what 300 years of that curve had built. What would 30 more years build? What would 300? The humans were kind today, he said, and perhaps they would be kind forever. But perhaps is not a foundation for the safety of a galaxy. And every cycle we waited, the price of being wrong about them doubled. There would never again be a moment when stopping them costs less than it cost right now. He moved that the Council assemble a unified fleet, all member states together, and end the question of humanity. While it could still be ended, I have been ashamed of my species twice in 400 years. The second time was watching how many delegates rose to applaud. The opposition fought back. The Yun delegate spoke of the rescue ships at that very moment, carrying vast soldiers to safety aboard human hulls. The Ofen asked what the humans had actually done wrong, and let the silence after the question do its work, because the answer was nothing. The humans had done nothing except defend their home with unsettling competence, and then offer kindness to the people who attack them. I took the floor myself and told the chamber that they were proposing to commit the exact crime the VAS had committed, except with the entire galaxy's name signed to it, and that they had all just watched live what happens to fleets that visit Sol with bad intentions. But fear has its own arithmetic, and the count was close. The vote was scheduled for the following session. Our internal projections gave the militarists a margin of 11 votes. 11 votes out of 900 between the galaxy and the largest war ever proposed. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my office with the old file and tried to compose a speech that could move 11 votes. And every draft failed because fear cannot be argued away by an archivist with a folder. And I knew it. The vote session opened at midday. The chamber was full beyond capacity. The Ho delegate was reviewing his final remarks. The voting consoles were live, and then the great doors of the chamber, doors that had been interrupted only once in 10,000 years, opened for the second time in 12 days. A single being walked in. She was small by the standards of most species in that room. She wore a plain gray suit of clothes with no armor, no insignia, no escort, and no visible equipment of any kind. She walked down the central aisle at an unhurried pace, and the chamber security systems, the most sophisticated defensive network ever constructed, systems that screen every molecule that enters that room, did not react to her at all, because, as we later discovered, she had politely informed them she was coming, and they had believed her because she had been inside our network for some time. Understand what I am telling you. The Council Station's location is the most protected secret in the galaxy. Its navigation routes are encrypted with mathematics we considered beyond solution. This being had not broken our locks. She had walked through them so gracefully that the locks never knew they had been opened, and she shared cross-hostile space alone, unarmed to a station full of beings voting on her species' destruction. And she had done it as far as we could observe calmly. That was the message before she ever said a word. The arrival was the message. We could have come here with a fleet, the arrival said. We came with one polite woman in a gray suit instead. Think carefully about what that means. She reached the speaker's podium, the same podium where Dare had projected his star map 12 days before, and she stopped, and she waited with her hands folded in front of her until the chamber's stunned silence had fully ripened. Then she spoke in flawless council standard with a warmth that I can only describe as disarming. She apologized for the interruption. She said her name was Grace Turner, that she carried the authority of the unified governments of Earth, and that she had been sent because her people understood there was a vote occurring today in which humanity had, in her words, a fairly strong interest. She said this with a small smile, and somewhere in the chamber, despite everything, someone laughed, a single startled bark of laughter, and the temperature of the entire room changed. She spoke for some time, and I will give you the heart of it. She told us that humanity had known about the Council for over 200 years. They had detected our old survey missions' traces within a century of our departure, decoded the residue of our instruments, and from that thread, patiently, they had unraveled the existence of the galaxy. They had been listening to us for 2 centuries. They had learned our languages from our own broadcasts. They knew our histories, our arts, our rivalries, and our fears. And they had chosen deliberately not to knock on our door, because they could see that we were afraid of them. And they had hoped that given enough time, the galaxy might grow ready on its own. The quarantine, she said gently, had never been holding them in. They had simply been respecting it, the way one respects a neighbor's fence, even when one can step over it. The VAS attack, she said, had ended that patience not in anger, but in practicality. Humanity could no longer wait to be discovered politely. So here she was, making the introduction herself. Then she turned to the matter of the vote, and her warmth did not waver, but the chamber grew very still. She said that humanity was aware of the proposal before the council. She said her people took no offense at it, because they had read enough of our history to know that fear is what beings feel when the unknown is large, and humanity was, she admitted cheerfully, quite large. But she wanted the delegates to vote with complete information rather than with guesses, and she placed a small data slate on the podium and connected it to the chamber display. What appeared above us was the Council's own defense network. All of it, the fleet positions of every member state, the patrol schedules, the supply lines, the hidden shipyards, including, and I watched governments flinch one by one as the map turned, the ones that member states had hidden from each other. Every defensive secret in the galaxy, rendered in patient, complete annotated detail, hanging in the air of our own chamber. She let us look at it for a long moment. Then she said the words that I believe saved the galaxy, and I will record them exactly as she spoke them. We are not showing you this as a threat. We are showing you what we chose not to use. We have had this information for a very long time, and in all that time, we have never acted on it, never sold it, never even hinted that we held it. We are showing it to you now, so that your vote today is honest. If you vote for war, you will not be choosing a safe and easy strike against a blind enemy, because we are not blind, and you can see now that we never were. And if you vote for peace, we want you to know exactly who you are making peace with, so that no one in this chamber can ever say they were deceived. Humans are pack animals. It is the oldest thing in us. We do not actually want territory, and we genuinely do not want war. And I say that as the representative of a species that is embarrassingly good at war. What we want, what we have wanted since we first realized the sky was full of neighbors, is honestly very simple. We would love a bigger pack. She picked up her slate, and the terrible map vanished, and she looked around the chamber at 900 silent delegations, and she added one more thing, almost as an afterthought in a softer voice. Also, she's your soldiers from the vast fleet are safe. All of them. The injured are recovering. The frightened are being fed, and several of them have become quite attached to a human dessert called chocolate cake, and we suspect this will complicate Dominion politics far more than any battle. They can go home whenever their government asks. We do not keep prisoners from wars we did not want. The Hulk delegate never gave his final remarks. The vote was held an hour later in a chamber that had walked in expecting to authorize a war, and instead had been gently, thoroughly, and kindly disarmed. The proposal for military action against the Sol system failed by 712 votes. That evening I found Grace Turner standing alone at the chamber's great viewing window, looking out at the stars with an expression I recognized because I have worn it myself, the look of someone seeing in person a thing they had only ever known from absence. I introduced myself. She knew who I was, she knew about the file, she had read it, she admitted decades ago, and she said it was the fairest portrait of her species ever written by an outsider. And then she said something I have thought about every day since. She said, "You were right to be afraid of us back then. We were right to be afraid of us too. The difference is that we had to live with ourselves anyway, so we got to work on it. We have had 300 years of practice at not being our worst selves. Now we would like some practice at being our best ones, somewhere bigger than home." Then she asked me with complete sincerity where a visiting ambassador might find a decent cup of tea on this station, and I realized that the most dangerous species in the galaxy had just asked me to tea, and that I was going to say yes, and that the long, fearful chapter my generation had written was over, and something entirely new was beginning. 20 years have passed since Grace Turner asked me for tea, and I am an old being now, retired from strategy, writing the final entry of my archive. And I want to finish by telling you what humanity actually did to the galaxy, because no one, not even me, predicted it correctly. The Council expected conquest. It never came. The humans signed the membership accords within a year of the vote, accepted a single seat in the chamber like everyone else, and followed our tedious procedures with a patience that baffled the duplicates who had feared them. When they disagreed with a ruling, they argued loudly and at length, and with a fondness for debate that exhausted entire committees, and then they abided by the result. The militarists kept waiting for the mask to slip. There was no mask. There was only a species that had spent its entire history learning to live with itself and was genuinely delighted to have someone new to talk to. The first thing they did with their membership was confusing to everyone. They asked for the Council's disaster records. Not military records, not technology archives. Disaster records. Every famine, every plague, every failing colony, every dying world in council space. Going back 1,000 years, our administrators handed the files over, puzzled, and the humans went away and read all of it. And then they started showing up. There was a Mel colony world whose star was entering an unstable period, a slow catastrophe that the Council had quietly classified as unsolvable, with a relocation plan scheduled across 2 centuries because that was the gentlest pace the budget allowed. Human engineering fleets arrived in orbit 11 months after the file was opened. They did not ask for payment. They asked for permission and for local partners because, as their chief engineer put it in a sentence that is now taught in our schools, we know how to manage an angry star. But it is your sky, and nobody should fix your sky without you. The shade swarm they built around that sun is visible from the planet's surface on clear nights. The Mel named a generation of their children after human engineers. There are, I am told, several thousand small male individuals walking around today named Henry. That was the pattern repeated across 100 worlds. The humans treated the galaxy's old accepted sorrows as a list of projects, and they attacked that list with the same focused, joyful, slightly alarming intensity that they had once aimed at their own moon. Stagnant terraforming programs that had crawled along for centuries suddenly finished. Plagues that our medical consortiums had managed rather than cured were cornered and ended because human biology forged on a death world had given them an understanding of disease that we simply never needed to develop, and they shared all of it freely to the lasting horror of our pharmaceutical guilds. And then there were the Vass. And this is my favorite part of the story, and I have saved it deliberately. The dominion that limped away from Sol was a broken power. Dare's defeat had collapsed the great houses into feuding fragments, and the galaxy expected the humans to either finish their old enemy or watch coldly while the dominion devoured itself. Because those were the only 2 options our history offered. The humans invented a third option. They sent food. The Dominion's outer worlds were starving in the chaos, and human relief convoys arrived unarmed at planets whose soldiers had attacked Earth. And they unloaded supplies and asked for nothing. And when a stunned brass governor demanded to know why, the human convoy captain, a woman named Laura Hart, whose own brother had served in the fleet that defended Sol, gave the answer that is now carved into the wall of the rebuilt Dominion Senate. She said, "Your government attacked us, and we beat your government. Your children were not on those ships. Where do you want the grain?" The prisoners from the invasion fleet went home eventually, all 2 million of them, healthy and well-fed and carrying stories. The Dominion had told its people that humans were monsters. 2 million returned soldiers stood up in town squares across 100 vast worlds and said, "We attacked their home, and they pulled us out of our broken ships, and they treated our wounded before some of their own. And also, there is a thing called chocolate cake, and the official story did not survive contact with the cake." I am being completely serious when I tell you that historians now mark the fall of old Dominion ideology from the testimony of returned prisoners, and that the first vast bakery to produce a licensed human-style cake headlines around the block for a full year. Dur himself lives quietly on a border world. The humans never demanded his punishment. His own people stripped his rank, and that was sufficient for Earth, whose representatives said only that humanity had a long tradition of letting defeated commanders go home and think about what happened, because the thinking, she said, is the punishment. The new Dominion, rebuilt by the generation that ate the relief grain, signed a defense pact with Earth 9 years ago. The galaxy laughed at the absurdity of it. The galaxy is not laughing anymore, because there are no more loyal friends to humanity anywhere among the stars than the brass who attacked them once, and who say openly that being defeated by Earth was the finest thing that ever happened to their species. I want to be honest in this final entry, because honesty is the entire purpose of an archive, so I will record the difficult parts too. Humans are exhausting. They are everywhere. They are loud. They argue as a form of recreation. They adopt every problem they encounter, and they have absolutely no concept of an appropriate pace. The Council ran at a stately walk for 10,000 years, and humanity arrived like weather. And there are still elder species who find the change almost unbearable. Committee sessions that once took a decade now take a season because the human delegates keep asking the question that our procedures were carefully designed to avoid, which is all right, but what are we actually going to do about it? They have dragged this slow old galaxy into an era of motion. And motion is uncomfortable, and not every discomfort is noble, and some days even I, who argued for them, find myself longing for the quiet centuries, when nothing happened and nothing was expected of anyone. And then I remember what the quiet centuries actually were. The quiet centuries were the Mel colony waiting 200 years under a dying sun, because that was the gentlest pace the budget allowed. The quiet was never peace. The quiet was a galaxy that had given up on its own problems so long ago that it had renamed the surrender and called it stability. Humans never learned how to do that. They come from a world that punishes surrender, and so they physically cannot watch a problem and do nothing. And what we mistook for danger 300 years ago, watching them through our long lenses, was really just this: an entire species that does not know how to give up, sealed in a bottle, getting stronger. We were so afraid of what they would do to the galaxy if they ever got out. We never once asked what they might do for it. That failure of imagination was ours, not theirs, and I write it here in the official record in my own hand. The fear was reasonable, it was also wrong, and being reasonable did not make it less wrong. And I want future readers to sit with that, because someday another curve will go vertical somewhere in the dark, and another council will sit in another chamber deciding whether to reach for a wall or a door. And I would like my voice to be in the room. I should also record for completeness that I have stood on Earth. 8 years ago, the humans invited a council delegation to visit their homeworld, the first official visit in history. And I claimed a place on it by shamelessly invoking my seniority, because I had watched that blue planet through long-range lenses 300 years before, and I had decided I was not going to die without feeling its impossible gravity pull on my old bones in person. They took us everywhere. They are incapable of hiding things, or perhaps simply uninterested in it, which still unsettles our diplomats who were trained for a galaxy where every host conceals something. We stood on the rim of a canyon so vast that 2 of our delegates initially refused to believe it was natural. We watched one of their spinning ocean storms from a coastal observation tower, and our hosts watched it with us with expressions I can only call affectionate, the way one regards a dangerous old relative. And on the final evening, they brought us to a quiet field in their northern hemisphere, where the very first of their rockets had been tested centuries ago, and a human child, perhaps 10 of their years old, part of a school group visiting the same monument, looked up at the delegate towering over her and asked, without a particle of fear, whether the stars were as fun as she hoped. The orphan delegate, a being who has stared down armed rebellions, was unable to speak for several seconds, and finally answered that the stars were even better now than they used to be. The child said, "Good," because she intended to see all of them, and then she rejoined her class, and the entire council delegation stood in silence in that field, because we had all just been shown in one sentence, the engine that built everything we had spent the week admiring. They intend to see all of them. They have always intended to see all of them. The weapons, the fleets, the curve that went vertical. All of it was only ever this child, multiplied by billions, refusing to accept a small life in a large universe. 3 years ago, that refusal produced its finest result yet. The first joint deep-range expedition departed from the council station, bound beyond the rim of explored space into the dark regions. Our charts have marked unknown for 10,000 years because no member species was ever willing to fund, crew, or risk the journey. The expedition's vessels were human-built. The crews were drawn from 30 species of RAS officer serves as second-in-command, which would have caused riots in the chamber 20 years ago. And today is not even the most remarkable line of the crew manifest. The most remarkable line is the mission charter itself, written by the human-led planning committee, 1 sentence long, adopted over the objection of every traditional bureaucracy in the council, and impossible to misunderstand. Go and see, it says, and come back and tell everyone. Their first reports arrived last season. New systems, new wonders, and in one report that made my old hearts race, the faint, distant signature of something that may be another young civilization still centuries from spaceflight, sings its early radio noise into the dark, exactly as humanity once did. The Council has already begun debating how to approach them, and the debate is unlike any in our history because this time there is a species in the chamber that remembers being on the other side of the lens. The human delegate's proposal currently leads the voting. It contains no quarantine, no sealed file, and no fence. It proposes that we watch over the newcomers from a respectful distance, protect their development from interference, and prepare openly and without fear for the day they look up, so that the first thing they ever learn about the galaxy is that it was waiting for them with door already open. The proposal is titled in plain human fashion, The Neighbor Protocol. I have read it 11 times. It is everything my generation failed to write, and the failure no longer stings because someone finally wrote it. Grace Turner retired last year. We have taken tea together, she and I, several hundred times across 2 decades, and she has never once let me pay, claiming an ancient human custom that I have been unable to verify in any of their cultural databases, and which I now believe she invented on the spot during our first meeting and has maintained ever since out of pure stubbornness, which, having read this archive, you will recognize as the most human possible explanation. At our final official tea, before her ship left for Earth, I asked her the question I had saved for 20 years. I asked her whether her people had ever feared us, even once, the way we feared them. She thought about it honestly, the way she thinks about everything, and then she said, "No, and I will tell you why, and it is not flattering to either of us. We grew up on a world where everything was trying to end us," she said. So, the idea of dangerous neighbors was never news. What kept our planners awake was a different fear entirely. We were afraid the galaxy would be empty. We were afraid we would finally get out there after all those centuries of dreaming and find nothing but rocks and silence and have no one to talk to forever. You cannot imagine what it meant to us to find the sky full of neighbors. You were terrified of us, and we were just so relieved you existed. The quarantine file sits in the Council Museum now behind glass on a small pedestal, and human tourists photograph it and laugh, and Yun school children are brought to see it as a lesson in the price of fear. The warning markers around Seoul were taken down 19 years ago. There is a human habitat ring around the council station today, and a rash trade hub beside it, and on the station concourse most evenings you can find beings from 40 species crowded into human establishments arguing, eating, telling stories, behaving in short like a pack. So let me close this archive the way a strategist should, with an assessment, the last one of my career. The Vass asked the council after their defeat why no one warned them. We did warn them. The warning was sealed in a vault, and that was our mistake, but the warning existed, and it was even accurate as far as it went. It described the weapons, the curve, the unbreakable stubbornness of the species from the death world. What it failed to describe, because I failed to understand it when I wrote it, was the actual danger of humanity, the real one, the one no quarantine could ever have contained. The danger is this: once humans decide that you matter to them, you will never ever be rid of them. They will cross any distance, fix your sun, feed your enemies, learn your language, drink your tea, name their children after your heroes, and teach their children to name theirs after yours. And they will keep showing up generation after generation with that exhausting, relentless, magnificent warmth, until the day you finally realize that you stopped being afraid of them so long ago that you cannot remember what the fear felt like, and that somewhere along the way, without a treaty or a vote or a single shot fired, they made you part of the pack. That is the complete record of the human arrival compiled by Velmore, formerly senior strategist of the Galactic Council. Witness to the quarantine and witness to its end. They are assaulting Earth. The chamber said that day 20 years ago, and the old ones walked out of the room, and the young ones asked, "Are they insane?" Yes. I should have answered and thanked the stars. So are the humans in the one way that matters. The bright, stubborn, generous madness of a species that survived the worst world we ever charted and came out of it, determined against all reason to be kind. End of archive.